was a very interesting case in a number of ways because these women were being raped. These were outdoor rapes at night. They were getting off the bus, most of them, commuting in from downtown Toronto back out to the suburbs. And as they were walking from the bus stop home, a lone male would accost them, drag them off into the between houses or in a parking lot or someplace and rape them. And of concern was the escalating amount of violence that was there. And as you know, we do that sort of triad of behavioral analysis: verbal, sexual, physical behavior, analyzing all three. The verbal behavior was profusely profane, very degrading, and so forth. The physical violence, the amount of force used, was escalating over the course of the rapes. Our concern was that this was escalating up toward homicide.
Sure.
But then they just stopped.
Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight? Today we have a special guest with us, retired supervisory special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, and is widely considered to be one of the pioneers of the famed profiling unit. Gregg McCrary. Gregg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ray. I appreciate the opportunity.
We are so happy to have you. Gregg is he's done many things. It's going to be a fascinating hour or more. We'll get into some of the bigger cases he's worked over the years. And of course, his book is The Unknown Darkness, Profiling the Predators Among Us. And if you like this profiling and true crime kind of stuff, I assure you will enjoy that book. And we'll catch up more about the book and some things Gregg is doing. But I want to say up front that, Gregg, you were probably the first profiler I ever worked with or met. And we came across each other in two separate ways. If you remember, I had a case out of New York of a woman who thought her father was a serial killer. And I'm not sure you ever officially opened the case in Quantico, or we just kind of talked on the phone, but you were very helpful. And we'll discuss that case at some point. It had to do with repressed memory at the end. But we put this woman undercover going up with her own father, who she hadn't seen in years. And it went on for about a year and a half with New York State Police involved. And Gregg, you basically called it right from the beginning, but we also realized we still had to follow through on some of these leads because this guy may have been a serial killer. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, I'll never forget going to the New York City homicide school, and I was there for 2 weeks. And I was one of only two FBI agents in the school. It's a very well-regarded school. People come in from around the country, even around the world, to get this 2-week training by NYPD. And about the third or fourth day in, one of the instructors was a guy named Vernon Gilbreth. He was kind of well known in the homicide world. He was a NYPD, captain, homicide, whatever. And, he wrote a book or two, and his reputation's pretty good. But he came in the training that day. The other agent was out doing something else that day. So I'm the only FBI agent among about 100 people in this room in the old NYPD Academy. And Vernon Gilbreth goes off about the FBI left and right negative. They're a bunch of assholes. They're a bunch of shitbirds. They're this. And I'm sitting there, and these detectives know who I am. And they're like looking at me, and they're more uncomfortable than I am. And we've all been there where people are kind of, oh, the FBI, this. Yeah, you laugh it off. I was a cop. I would say stuff too. But this guy went on for about 10 or 12 different heavy insults towards the FBI, some really bad language. And finally, at the end, I walked up to him. Everyone else was gone. I said, do you teach much, Mr. Gilbreth? What do you mean do I teach? I've done this 10 years now, So, well, you should really get to know your audience because I'm an FBI agent and you kind of railed against me. Hold on. You, what do you do? I said, I'm a street agent here in New York. Oh, I have no problem with you. It's those assholes in Quantico. Yeah. I said, well, okay. Well, first of all, that sounds like your own issue. And second of all, take it up with them. And third of all, why make me the brothers? I said, I do some teaching too, Vernon, and I would never do this to my audience. So, Gregg, you came in just by chance, like the next day.
Yeah.
And I went up to you and, again, in private, just the two of us, FBI, FBI. And I said, do you know this guy? Do you know how he's bad-mouthing the Bureau? And you had to do with a book he wrote, and he got statistics from like 2 years before instead of 1 year. And he was all pissed off because the book had already gone to the publisher. And I don't know, between the case we worked together in New York and then this NYPD thing, about a year later, an opening came in the unit for profiler, a bunch of openings, about 18 at once, I think. And I put in for it. And Gregg, I think you saw my name come across. And at least you didn't say anything bad about me, I don't think.
True.
And so if anyone wants to curse me or don't like the fact that I became a profiler, Gregg may have had something to do with it back then. So again, publicly, thank you for all your shepherding of cases and just listening to me over those couple of years.
Yeah. It's interesting that I did the NYPD homicide school a number of years up there with Ray Pierce, who had organized.
Good guy.
Yeah. And Ray was one of the first NYPD, one of the first police fellows that we trained. And Ray was ultimately a big promoter of what we do. The quick backstory on Ray, he said, "Oh, this school at Quantico," he says, "it's going to be a vacation." He said, "It's supposed to be like 10 months or a year," but he said, "I'm going to go down for 2 weeks. What are they going to tell me about homicides that I don't know? I'm a lieutenant with a homicide. What are they going to tell me?" He said, 2 weeks into it, he goes, "I think these guys are on to something. I'm going to hang around." And he became one of our biggest proponents. But I also knew what you experienced was that Gebert was bad-mouthing Quantico and what we were doing. And Ray said, "Would you mind coming in and just presenting what you do down there to counterbalance the bullshit that Vern is putting out there?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem." I said, let Vern come on first, let him do the thing, then I'll come on, and everybody can make up their mind whether we got something going or who's right and who's wrong. So that's kind of the way that worked out. So.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning Ray Pierce, because after Vernon left that day, Ray, I think it was after lunch or something, he came up, "Hey, everyone in this class, I want you to know the opinions and impressions by that last speaker has nothing to do with me, the NYPD. I work great with the FBI, et cetera, et cetera." And, and my last story is about 5 years later. We were like once a month on a Wednesday, we'd bring in a guest speaker, and usually outside to the FBI, some retired folks, whatever, to Quantico. And Vernon Gilbert was next to be on the list. And I went up to the bosses then, Bill Hagmeyer and a few others. "You don't want this guy here. He badmouths us left and right." I was in the room. He's embarrassing. He tried to embarrass us. And we actually had a little bit of an argument. Finally, they said, "Okay, forget it." And as far as I know, up to 2007, when I retired, he was never invited back at the FBI. And look, if he's listening or people know him, he knows his homicide stuff. He's fine, but he really didn't handle his audiences very well. And if he had a problem with the Quantico people, he should have made it very specific to that. So lesson for all of us, know your audience when you're training. If you're going to pick on a certain agency or a certain person, you may want to know who's in the crowd there that night.
Yeah.
I want to throw something out, Jim. Gregg was the first person that kind of touched your fancy a little bit into the profiling stratosphere. Believe it or not, he was the guy that did it for me as well. When I was in Buffalo, Arthur Shellcross was a case in Rochester, New York. And Gregg had been in Buffalo, and Chuck Wagner, who was what we call the NCAVC coordinator, but he was a liaison then with the unit down there. And I remember when Gregg came up, I met him, and I said, "Well, I didn't make that great of an impression. I guess maybe because I was with Chuck, but he didn't remember me, So we're just sitting here, but that was my first taste of it. And I said, this is something I want to do. And that was 1990, 1989?
Right, yeah,
and
exactly.
We kind of just took off from there.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Gregg. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure.
Well,
go ahead, Ray.
Well, Gregg, before we get started, I know we were kind of reminiscing a little bit, which is nice, but I'm sure our audience wants to know a little bit about you. What's your backstory? Before you went into the FBI, and then eventually making your way down as the first generation of the BSU, or it's whatever it was at that time.
Yeah. I EOD'd in the Bureau in 1969, under the old days under Hoover. Prior to that, I'd been out of college a couple of years. I was teaching. I know I didn't want to do that forever. I met an agent. He began to recruit me. I said to myself, I'm not sure what the FBI would want with me, but it sounds kind of cool. So let me fill out the application, and we'll see what happens. So I did. I went through, how that goes, the testing and the background and interviews and all of that. And lo and behold, I got an appointment as an agent. And it was then, which I think it still is now, a 3-year commitment. And I said, well, hell, I can do anything for 3 years. If I don't like it, I'll quit after 3 years and do something else. And turned out I quit after over 25 years. So it turned into its own career. And briefly, my first office was Detroit, and I worked what I call disorganized crime there: bank robberies, kidnappings, extortions. Then second office was New York. And I worked organized crime there, the old LCN, La Cosa Nostra Mafia stuff primarily. And then I got transferred up to Buffalo, where I worked mostly organized crime stuff, but it's a smaller office, so you get a cross section of other things as well. And at that point, I became kind of the field coordinator for the NCABC. Got to know John Douglas and Bressler, and a slot opened up, and I was interested, and they encouraged me to put in for it, and it worked. And I went down and finished out my career down at Quantico doing the profiling.
Can I back you up a little bit? Because there's not too many people we get on who can actually say they shook the hand of J. Edgar Hoover. I assume you went through that ritual?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, yes. Yeah, basically, yeah. We were warned to be very careful because he was aging and a little idiosyncratic at that time. And
a little bit.
Yeah. And be careful. I don't know what we're supposed to do. He said, because if he doesn't think you look or act like an agent, he said, we're going to have to dream up some reason to fire you. So don't do anything screwy. Go in, do it and get out of there. And don't hang around the 7th floor, because at that time we were training on the 7th floor of headquarters. It was a crazy time back in '69 in that regard. The new academy, or the academy that is there now, wasn't there. We were on kind of like a barracks on the main side of the base. We had 8 guys to a room, 2 guys to a locker. It was a totally different environment than we have now. And some of the training took place there, some at headquarters, some at the old Washington Field House, which was the old post office, which was the Trump Hotel and now is the Waldorf or whatever it is now. But that was the old post office, and that's where Washington Field Office was back in the day. So we did some training and then some actually work with the Washington Field Office to get our feet wet, just working under the wings of agents there before we actually went out to our first office.
But there are stories of people that Hoover didn't like, their handshake, their grip, whatever, and he would note to Clyde Tolson or whoever next to him, this guy goes, and the guy'd be fired. And I mean, he wouldn't even know why necessarily. So you made it through that test.
Yes, I did. So yeah, then it was off to Detroit. And as opposed to the nice graduation ceremonies they have at Quantico now, it was here's your orders and don't let the sun set on your ass in D.C. Get out there. So that's the way that was, back in the day.
Early on, you're down in a unit. For our audience, I mean, Fitz and I know what it's like now, what it has been, what it's kind of changed to. But you were there in the very, very beginning. What was it like? Yeah,
it was a unique experience. We were down in the basement, 60 feet underground. They had us in the old bomb shelter down there. It's always say death finds its way to the basement, right? Morgues are never in a penthouse. And the same way they put us down there because we're doing weird stuff. And, nobody really wanted to know too much about it, at that point. And it was definitely not well accepted. I mean, this idea of psychology and the soft science, I mean, the Bureau of Macho Hard Science, that sort of stuff. And this is the squishy soft science. And, we, get some pushback and questions about the validity of, what we're doing. Was it going to be applicable at all to anything that we were doing? And, the idea of you're out interviewing serial killers, so what? They become a serial killer because they don't have the benefit of a hot lunch program? I mean, who cares? What do we care about that stuff? And eventually we get to across to them the idea that, hey, these are the experts, not us. If we want to understand how they do what they do, let's go interview them. They're the ones actually doing this stuff, not us. Let's go learn from them and see what we can pick up. And then that's it's the old adage about a new truth. There are three phases of that. One is resistance, and the second phase is just virulent resistance, and then the third phase is being accepted as obvious all along. And that's what happened. Oh yeah, we should have been doing these interviews all along. That makes perfect sense. Of course, they're the experts. Of course, we should be doing this. And so it was a transitional period in there to get us a little more accepted. And of course, the same with the PDs. I mean, the psychobabble crap you're going to come out and tell us, but I always said, if you give me an experienced detective who's looked at cases, he's going to see the value of what we're doing, and they're going to see the applicability. And I think that's what people misunderstand about profiling. In other words, if you're a detective and I come to you and, you come to me about a case, I say, well, it's a white guy in his 30s and this kind of a background or whatever. I mean, the right response, I think, from the detective is, well, it's kind of interesting, but how do I catch the guy? And that's exactly it. That's what this is designed to do. The most important things we do, as you guys know, is investigative strategy or interview strategy to move the investigation along and not just, opine about, the guy's criminal history necessarily. So it's, and then laying those traps of behavior, using his own behavior to entrap him or catch him in some way is really how it works. So eventually people, once they see it work, they become believers in what we're doing.
It's such a ring of truth to that. I'm in Philly. I transfer in late 91 and early 92. Fitz, I don't think you were down with this, but they had a NCAVC school, a 1 week basic.
Again, National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime.
And I'll explain that. But when you look at that NCAVC, I don't even know if it was NCAVC then. I don't think it was called that. I think it was just behavioral analysis or something like that. I don't think it got into that. I don't think that came into a little bit later, Jim. But I remember sitting on the bank robbery fugitive squad, which was violent crime, and I remember them saying, I get called in by the supervisor because I was a young guy and on the squad, in year-wise, maybe 4 or 5 years in. And I remember them saying, hey, we got to send someone down to Quantico to this hocus pocus bullshit. And I said, I'm thinking, shit. Well, look, I'll volunteer. I'll go, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that. But they didn't know that. But because nobody else wanted to go, they all thought it was a crock of crap. So it wasn't just the cops.
No, yeah.
It was our own people.
Totally. Yeah, trying to sell it in-house was one of the tougher sells, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was our own people. They just thought it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo. These guys, I don't know what the hell they think they're talking about, but they didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, I did. I got it. I drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
So, Gregg, when I got to the unit in 95, you had just retired. We never technically worked together in the unit.
Correct.
And we went through there was about 18 of us. I guess 12 went to the child abduction serial killer unit. It was brand new, started just about the time you left. And I went to the investigative support unit. They all wound up merging to the behavioral analysis unit, and there's different numbers assigned to them. But they basically put us through a 12-week training block. So, of course, we went through the academy for 16 weeks when we first came in as brand new special agents.
Mhm.
And then here I am back at the academy taking, these courses taught by John Douglas and others from the outside and inside, whatever. And but I'm wondering, when you first got to the unit, was it early 80s for you? I'm not even sure the exact time. What kind of training was involved?
Yeah. It was basically just working under the wing of these guys with John
Right.
and Bob Douglas, Bob Ressler and John Douglas and Ken Lanning and Roy Hazelwood and all those guys. And it was just basically working under their wing and going out with them on cases and just kind of getting thrown in the deep end of the pool and traveling along and picking it up as we went along. There were some formal schools. I went to a couple of classes, actually more than that. It was the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Bethesda. Maryland had courses in basic and advanced forensic pathology, and went to some interview schools outside the Bureau, Reed and some other ones. So there's some outside schools that I went to, but a lot of it was just the in-house training itself and just being there and getting immersed in that stuff. So it wasn't as formal a training as you had.
Yeah, and we had some of that too, what you're describing also, but the formal training, and of course I provided that training later in my career to new agents or new profilers, I should say, as they came in. So do you remember what would you say was your earliest, biggest case as a profiler? Was it something you worked on your own with your colleagues? I mean, it's always a collegial effort there, but sometimes you still have the ticket on it. And do you remember what that case would have been?
Yes. Yeah, I do. It was a serial rape case up in Toronto, and worked with Metro Toronto PD on that in their sex assault squad up there. We had a serial rapist working in Scarborough, which is a tony kind of suburb northeast of Toronto itself. And these women were being raped. These were outdoor rapes at night. They were getting off the bus, most of them, commuting in from downtown Toronto back out to the suburbs. And as they were walking from the bus stop home, a lone male would accost them, drag them off into the between houses or in a parking lot or someplace and rape them. And of concern was the escalating amount of violence that was there. And as you know, we do that sort of triad of behavioral analysis: verbal, sexual, physical behavior, analyzing all three. The verbal behavior was profusely profane, very degrading, and so forth. The physical violence, the amount of force used, was escalating over the course of the rapes until the last, we had 7 at the time I went up there. He'd beaten her to the point she had a broken collarbone and bruised ribs, and he'd ground her face into the dirt and, all of that sort of thing. And sexually very, very violent with the women as well. So that was the first real case that I got involved in that I had the lead on, in that situation. Now, to cut to the chase, it was a very interesting case in a number of ways, because our concern was that this was escalating up toward homicide.
Sure.
But then they just stopped.
Hey, Cold Red fans, Fitz here. Are you interested in a career in criminal justice? You've heard me talk about numerous cases I've worked over the years involving the scientific analysis of language, known as forensic linguistics. Well, Pennsylvania Western University now has a fully accredited MA program, which I actually co-developed, where I teach forensic linguistics along with various other excellent professors too. This is the only forensic linguistic graduate program in the world which is both online and asynchronous. That means the courses are 100% on your schedule. We have professor video recordings, academic readings, and real-life case exercises posted weekly, and you can access any time to review and then complete the week's assignment. If you're interested in learning how written and spoken language can help solve crimes and get a master's degree at the same time, check out the Pennsylvania Western University's Forensic Linguistics program at www.penwest.edu. ray.edu/justice.
I mean, there are a few more, and they were violent, but they just stopped. And so now 2 years go by, and you know how that is. Meanwhile, I've been working some other cases in that 2-year period with some Canadian authorities up there, Niagara Regional Police and Ontario Provincial Police. And they had some murders and things I'd worked. And then a couple of years later, they brought me another case, which was the rape and murder of a young girl. And she'd been out late and got locked out of the house, and it looked like an opportunistic thing. She just disappeared, and then 2 weeks later, her dismembered body is found in a reservoir, and the body is in cement blocks. And so they called me in. They wanted me involved in that case. And so I got involved. We began working that one. A few months later, there was an abduction of a 16-year-old girl from another part of southern Ontario. But there was some reason I began to get concerned about the linkage, as did they. The first girl was abducted in Burlington, and her body was dumped in St. Catharines. The second girl was abducted in St. Catharines, and her body was dumped in Burlington. But the body dumped in Burlington was within 500 yards of the grave of the first victim.
Interesting.
So, so is this a coincidence, or is this what do we have going on?
Right.
So they started a task force to do these investigations, and we had some other extraneous murders. And you know how that goes. You had to figure out which ones were and weren't involved, and one was an accident, and one was another one. But these
can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Our younger viewers and listeners, this is probably the time before DNA analysis was in place, where you could definitely link the crimes to one person. So
that's an excellent point, because DNA was just coming on the scene, and I was up initially in 1989, I think, in Toronto. So it was just barely coming on, but they were taking DNA samples from suspects at that time. But it was, you needed, first of all, to get the sample from the victim, you needed a lot, which, we don't need today. And then go out and taking the DNA samples. And then the testing and the analysis was a much more laborious process than it was now. But they did take, I think, over 100 different DNA samples from potential suspects. They just asked people for their DNA. They had some reason to look at them. So now we're in 1992 now, by the time we get this abduction of Kristen French. And there are a couple of interesting sidelights. One was there was a TV producer up there who came forward and said he wanted to help. I got a call from the Vince Bevan, who was running the task force. He said, "You ever had TV people that want to help?" And I said, "Well, law enforcement was a little skeptical of TV." And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, let's think about this. There might be a way. And so we decided, we would do it. And then what started out as a 30-minute program turned into a 90-minute. And I said, we can use this maybe investigatively. I said, because the killer is going to be watching this. I said, put the advertisement out. Everybody's going to he's going to want to know what's going on. So we did. Now, in the abduction, eyewitnesses described 2 males in a cream-colored Camaro abducting this 16-year-old girl from the parking lot of a church. So we got 2 offenders at the scene. So what we did in the TV show was, one, we hit all the emotional buttons. She was Kristen French, great, nice kid, 16-year-old, everybody's sweetheart kind of thing. And we hit those kind of emotional buttons, and then we separate that with objective police kind of stuff about the investigation, but obviously not telling what we were actually doing with the case, but giving some information about it. And then I came on, and what my point was to kind of quote unquote profile, but I used fear as kind of a weapon. I said, this guy's a cold psychopathic killer, but I described the second offender as in a much more favorable way, saying, didn't really probably want to go along with this, didn't like it, probably isn't that bad a person, but they're in danger because as this case closes in, and we're closing in, this person could be at risk and could be, being killed. And so I'm trying to drive a wedge in there if I can between the two offenders and then other people. I said, if you think this guy, you need to call in because he's dangerous and he could kill people around him. I gave an example like of Ed Kemper killing his mother and, that sort of thing. So I said, everybody's in best interest to call this in. And so the profile also, I said, this guy is typically, he hates women. We linked those two cases, the girl in the cement blocks and Kristen French, together. We didn't say that in the TV show exactly, but we indicated, there were some similarities in the cases. And I said, this guy is brutal to all the women in his life, and he's going to be abusive. He's in a relationship with a wife or a girlfriend. That's going to be an abusive relationship and so forth. So lo and behold, what happens is this girl gets beaten badly by her boyfriend, and she's in the hospital. She files a complaint. His name is Paul Bernardo. Her name is Carla Homolka. Paul gets arrested for the domestic homicide, for the domestic violence. Now, he was also a guy that gave his DNA to the Scarborough rapes 2 years ago. He was living in Scarborough. Now he's living up in St. Catharines area. And at the same time, 2 years later, took 2 years for the DNA testing to be done on Bernardo. And it's a hit. He's the Scarborough rapist. So this whole thing explodes. So now he's our prime suspect in the murders. He's our prime suspect in the rapes. So this guy I really profiled twice without knowing, but he did exactly what we thought he was going to do, tragically, which is escalate up to, up to murders. One thing from the profiling thing that worked really well was that I worked with the Crown attorneys to get a search warrant. He's a sexually sadistic guy. I said he would have videotaped this, and there's going to be videotapes of these crimes. And so we got a search warrant to search his residence. Now, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is the cops searched it, and they didn't find it, didn't find the videotapes. He wrote a letter to his attorney, who then went in after the cops had searched. He took the videotapes. That came into to our attention eventually. Once he realized, we knew that the authorities knew he had the tapes, and they were threatening to charge him with with evidence tampering and so forth. He gave them up, and there they were. They're the tapes of him doing the rapes and the murders and so forth. And the one final bizarre twist, I'll tell you, Carla came. She rolled over and gave a lot of this up, and she gave up another murder that we didn't even know, and that was her sister, that they had raped and murdered her younger sister, Tammy, at a family Christmas party. Paul had always wanted to have sex with her. Carla said, no, I'm not, it's not going to happen. You're not going to have sex with my little sister. He finally put enough pressure on Carla that Carla brought drugs and drugged her younger sister. She passed out, and then they raped her, and that's on the videotapes. And then she died of a drug overdose. So it wasn't seen as a homicide, much less a sexual homicide. It was ruled an accidental death by drugs and alcohol. And only later did we learn the truth about that. So that's certainly one of the more memorable cases I had, and it started off not long after I got down in the unit.
That's an amazing story, and I know I've heard you tell bits and pieces. I know it's in your book too.
Yeah.
I forget what Paul's status is, but I think only in the last few years, Carla was going to get out of prison. There was a lot of controversy whether she should be eligible for parole or not. Do you know anything about that part?
Yes, yeah. She cut a deal with the prosecutors, and all I can say is their legal system must be different than ours. They cut a deal for 12 years, and of course, here you cut a deal. It's if you tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and if you don't tell the truth, the deal's off. Well, she had not mentioned the murder of her sister until the videotapes came out. But yet they were locked into this 12 years. So she did her 12 years and she's out. And there was even controversy with that because during the time she was serving her 12 years, photos of her came out at Christmas parties and different things. And she's in a minimum security prison. And it was very controversial. It still is in Canada. It still is a very hot topic up there for people who know the case and know what's going on with her.
And remind me, what's Bernardo's status? Is he still with us?
He's forever. He's locked up for the duration. He'll never get out. He's technically eligible for consideration, but no way in the world are they going to let this guy out, and rightfully so.
Agree.
That was an excellent learning case for me, and you may have presented it to us at some point, but it's pretty rare to have serial offenders work in tandem, and certainly two men. And it sounds like early on, even with the suspect lead, they didn't know the co-conspirator was a woman necessarily.
We did not. No, we were going with the witnesses who described two males. That's the most statistically probable scenario.
But your strategy was excellent to kind of scare. There's always an alpha male involved in when it is more than one person, and
right.
You get beta in down the line after that, especially if it's a woman. And through your profile, you kind of put the fear of God in her. Yeah. And who knows if that actually was the eliciting factor of the domestic abuse.
I think it was because I kind of skipped over a thing. I didn't, we could talk about this for a long time, but once we knew we had the DNA, and we knew that Carla, was the wife and so forth. We designed the interview strategy for the police to go up and talk to her. And they went up and she thought initially, first of all, she was surprised it was like 4 or 5 detectives, and not just the Niagara Regional PD about the domestic violence, but it was these task force guys. And they talked to her about the domestic thing, but then they began asking her, do you know anything about Scarborough, any rapes in Scarborough? Do you know anything about an abduction from the Grace Lutheran Church in St. Catharines of a 16-year-old girl, and so forth? We know now that when they didn't push it, they just laid it out there. When they left, she was with her parents. Or it was an aunt and uncle, I think. Anyway, she turned to them and she said, oh, my God, they know everything. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. She got an attorney, which is exactly what we were hoping, because now the attorney came forward and said, I've got a witness that can be helpful in solving this. Let's make a deal. And so that's how it played out.
I have a question for you, Gregg.
Yeah.
I know a lot of our listeners, because we get some of these questions that come in to Jim and I from time to time. When you're looking at these cases, when do you know that you're onto something? How do you see these things? Is it your experience, or what is it that leads you down that path where you feel like, hey, I'm onto something here?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't know quite how to explain it. It certainly is experience. I think when you begin to look at enough of these cases, certain things begin to resonate, but it's also evidence driven. And, there are coincidences, but then again, when things start coming together, the body being within 500 yards of the gravestone of the other girl and things like that, that definitely get your attention about linking beginning to link the cases together. So each case is unique in its own way, I think, and you just get a sense. It's difficult for me to articulate, but I think it's based on the evidence and the totality of the circumstances that you're dealing with, that you get a sense of who you're after, or if you're on the right, headed down the right path that's going to get you where you need to go.
But could it be too that some of these guys are creatures of habit, and they don't break?
It's the pattern. Yeah. It's the pattern that they are involved in. You mentioned the Shawcross case in Rochester, right, very briefly, how he got caught. I mean, was the investigative strategy that we gave to the cops, and they instituted this strategy. In other words, he'd been killing prostitutes. We had 3 missing women that we thought were victims, but we had no bodies yet. And so we're always, as you know, want to be proactive with these things. So let's not wait for another citizen to find it. Let's us go. Let's law enforcement get out there and look for these bodies, because we thought he was coming back to mutilate these victims. The latest victim we'd had was a girl named June Stott, who had been eviscerated. We thought, yeah, she's part of the series, and he's going to come back and eviscerate more. So we're going to go find bodies. So, okay, so where do you go look? Well, you use his behavior. You look at his pattern to develop your investigative strategy. He dumped all these bodies along, we call him the Genesee River Gorge guy. He dumped these bodies along the river gorge and in tributaries. First body was in Salmon Creek, which was a tributary to the Genesee River. So we got the New York State Police, Genesee County Sheriff's Office, Rochester PD, put up helicopters, put guys on the ground, and we're searching in and along the gorge and the waterways. And lo and behold, they fly over Salmon Creek, again, where one of the first victim's body was found. Boom, there's a body underneath a bridge. And here's, you make your own luck in these cases. Parked on that bridge over the body was a guy. And it was colder than hell in January, and he was out of the car on this bridge. Of course, he saw the blue and gold New York State Police blazoned helicopter, got back in and took off. They did the right thing, get the ground units, follow him in, get him identified. And who is this guy? Well, it's Shawcross, and he's our guy. He did 15 years for sexual homicide. We're going, holy shit, here we are. This is our guy. And sure enough, that's who it was. But that's the pattern we're talking about, the pattern of behavior of dumping those bodies there and then go searching in that same area. And lo and behold, he had murdered not only murdered, but had engaged in postmortem mutilation with that victim who was under the bridge. So it all came together, and it all played out.
That was a great case. That was my first. That was my swan song there. I mean, that's what got me involved.
Yeah. And again, it's that idea of providing investigative strategy, looking for the patterns, then using his own behavior against himself. That's the way, if we can do it, that can work.
Gregg, backing up a little bit, at some point you became involved in authoring what is still a very well-known research document. That's the Crime Classification Manual. You were involved in that, weren't you? Explain a little bit to our audience how that came about and what its purpose was.
Right. The idea was we wanted to create a crime classification manual that would mirror the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what psychologists and psychiatrists use to classify, diagnose mental disorders. Well, we decided we would like to do the same thing for crime. Let's have a kind of a diagnostic manual, and then talk about the defining characteristics, just like the DSM does. What are the characteristics and traits of a particular disorder? And then we'd put in some investigative considerations if you have this kind of a case, so that could be helpful to to the investigators. So, and we're at what, DSM-5 now, I think, or whatever it is. I've lost track. But we felt, well, this is going to be like DSM-1. This is going to be the entry level that can be refined over time. As time goes on, but let's get a foundational work in, and then we can, we could work on it and develop it from there. So that was the idea behind the crime classification manual.
Yeah, it was a Bible for us young profilers. And Ray, I'm sure you have a copy somewhere too.
I do. I have one here. I could pull it out. Matter of fact,
Yeah.
it made it mandatory for. I teach a violent crime class where we talk about some cases and things of that nature, and that's one of the required reading books so that they can look into that and kind of get an understanding. It was a great resource. Great resource.
Good.
Gregg, I over the years, the OPP in Canada and the RCMP, they built a very strong profiling unit, separate ones, but they kind of work together too. And it sounds like you may have been there in the early days. They brought you up, and I'm sure you probably indirectly sort of helped formulate some policy for their own different agencies to start their own profiling units, so to speak. And I know OPP, RCMP, and others have some very strong units and some good people over the years that came out of there.
Yes, yeah. Kate, there's a female, Kate Lyons, who went through our police fellowship. She's from OPP. She was very good, and went back.
Greg, let me back you up. You mentioned that with Ray. What was the police fellowship, and how did it work?
Yeah, that was a program about 10 months. We brought in police detectives from their departments with the idea that their department would pay their salary, but we would house them and feed them and train them at Quantico. So we did. We housed them at Quantico. We fed them and we trained them. And the idea would be that they would go back to their department as resources, not only for their department, but for all the regional police departments around the area. And then we would work in liaison with them. And a good example, I just mentioned the Shawcross case. I had Eddie Grant, who was a lieutenant with the New York State Police, who we trained. Eddie worked with me on the Shawcross case as well. So this is the idea behind the police fellowship program. And it was international. We trained folks from the Netherlands, from Australia, and so forth. So it wasn't limited solely to the U.S., but we're looking for people from major departments that could go back and be a resource for their department, as well as surrounding neighboring agencies as well.
I kind of interrupted you here, but you mentioned Kate Lyons. I know she was one of the early profilers, and I think the OPP, right?
Yeah, she did the OPP. She went up and really instituted, set the framework in place for a robust behavioral science unit. And they kind of modeled it after our model. In other words, they brought in outside experts, as we do, forensic pathologists, forensic psychiatrists. Dr. Collins up in Ontario is the forensic psychiatrist that works with OPP. So they had a very strong program up there. Matter of fact, I did work with Kate some on the Bernardo case as well. She was involved working with me in that case as well.
And if we didn't say it, OPP is Ontario Provincial Police, and one of many of the province police agencies there. Again, we can go on for hours with this. I'm just in kind of order. I think you were still in the bureau when you worked, but I know you're doing some current work. The Jack Unterweger case.
Yeah, Unterweger. Yeah, Jack
Unterweger.
Yeah, totally.
Walk us through that matter. An international serial killer.
Yeah, it was. It was another one of the more memorable cases that I worked, and it's an example of how this behavioral analysis can be used in different ways. He was. I got a call from our legal attaché. We have agents assigned to every embassy overseas. I got a call from our legal attaché, legat in Vienna, and that the Austrian authorities had a serial murder case. They thought they had a good suspect, but they'd never worked one before, and they would like to tap into the Bureau's expertise on this to see if there's anything we could do to be helpful. And of course, we say what we say, which is yes, we'd be happy to try and help out. So I said, either I can come over or they can come over here. They sent two guys over here, the lead investigator and an associate over here. And what I told them, they had made an arrest, but I told them I didn't want to know anything about the suspect. I wanted to look at this as a profiling case. I just want to look at the crimes and see if they're related and draw up my own profile. Then let's overlay that on the suspect, and let's see where we go from here and what we can do. Again, it's a long story. I just kind of keep it short, but I did the analysis. They were here for a couple of weeks, and I did nothing but clear the deck and work with them for a couple of weeks on the case. And the profile I constructed really matched this guy very well. And of course, the big problem was with an international case. He's murdering in Austria, in Czechoslovakia, in Los Angeles. So how do you connect these cases? And, one is that, can we put him in every one of these places where the crimes occurred? And the answer is yes. So right away, he's either the unluckiest guy in the world or there's something going on. We talked about coincidences and so forth. Plus, he was a convicted murderer already, had done a sexual homicide, had done 15 years in prison, and then was released. It's an interesting side story. He went, and there's a learning thing here too, I think. He got convicted of murdering this 18-year-old girl. They didn't charge him with another murder, but he went into prison illiterate. He learned to read and write. He became an award-winning playwright and author. He became the darling of the Viennese Cafe Literary Society. They thought it was proof of the redemptive power of the arts that he channeled his homicidal tendencies into the artistic realm, and he was rehabilitated, and they petitioned for his release, and he was released. And then he went to all the book signings and the play openings and was on TV and talking about prison reform and all these sorts of things. At the same time, he's out murdering 11 women while he was doing this. So, I mean, to me, the learning point there is, I asked kind of the rhetorical question in the chapter I wrote on this. I said, so what do you get when you educate a psychopath? You get an educated psychopath. That's what you get. He's not rehabilitated.
That's right.
He's not a good guy to release. So I worked with the LA cops and worked with the Austrian authorities. And what I did is a signature crime analysis with this, linking the crimes together behaviorally and on some of the forensic evidence. The biggest thing forensically, and there was good work done by a criminalist out in LA, in the LA County Sheriff's Office, who looked at the knots. All these women were tied. They did ligature strangulation. They died of ligature strangulation. Interestingly, the knots in every case were tied exactly the same way, in a complicated manner, but exactly the same way. The knots in the European cases and the LA cases. So this was a forensic linkage. And then we had some other things. We had the DNA of one of the victims, the Czechoslovakia victim, in his car. There was some other forensic evidence, some hairs and fibers that linked him to some of the other crimes. So there was some physical and forensic evidence. But then again, I kind of used that along with behavior to link these cases together behaviorally. I ended up testifying against him in his trial in Graz, Austria, and he was convicted there of. Interestingly, 9 of the 11, I give the jury a lot of credit. They didn't convict. They had to be very thoughtful, because the 2 they didn't convict him of were skeletal remains where we couldn't prove that they died of ligature strangulation, even though there was a garment knotted there at the remains. But they convicted him of 9 of the 11 cases. Which 1 would have been fine. 9 was great. And to me, it validated the signature crime because they convicted him of the L.A. cases, the Czechoslovakian case, and the rest were the Austrian cases. In a quick end to this story, within 6 hours of being convicted, he hung himself in his jail cell. So I was disappointed. I was looking forward to try to spend some time, talk to him a little bit, but that was his way out. I've talked about this before. It's not guilt or remorse or shame or anything. The last thing he had control over was his life. He was not going to allow us the satisfaction of knowing he was rotting away in prison. He was going to take control over the last thing he had control over. And this was his, if I may be blunt, his last fuck you to society. He's out of there. He's gone. Not going to give us the satisfaction. Not going to subjugate himself to the rule of law.
That's what psychopaths do, right? I mean, it's
Exactly.
one last on the way out. I wonder if the knot he tied around his neck matched the ones
It
he
did.
used as crime
It
scenes.
was his finest murder of all. It was the best murder of all, in my opinion.
It was consistent. It was consistent with everything
pattern.
else.
It's the pattern that we've
Exactly.
discussed.
Gregg, aren't you doing some media work about this case? Is there anything you can talk about?
Yeah. There'll be there come a couple of programs. One on Netflix that's coming out probably in the fall about this case, and there's another one that should be out before that, but I haven't heard directly about that. That will be on Peacock streaming service, so I can stay in touch and let you know once I know what's going on. But yeah, true crime is a big thing now. So a lot of media flocking to these interesting cases. And so I've done a couple of recent interviews on the case. And it looks to me like both productions are going to be pretty good. So I'm looking forward to see how they turn out.
So if you're a part of it, no doubt it will be.
Let me ask you about another case that I think you might have had something to do with, the Sam Shepard homicide case.
Oh, yeah. The old Sam Shepard case. Again, I'm old, but I'm not that old, but yet I got involved in this case. It was a 1954 homicide initially of his wife in Bay Village, Ohio. Sam was a surgeon. He and his two brothers, all three were doctors. They opened a hospital in Bay Village and were running that. He was a well-respected guy in the community. And on a July 4th weekend, his wife was brutally bludgeoned to death in their home in Bay Village, Ohio. Very unusual. As you can imagine, 1950s, suburban Bay Village, Ohio, not a hotbed of crime. And so it was a big deal. Bay Village, Ohio PD called in the Cleveland PD homicide to help them with a shout out to Bay Village, Ohio. The initial police report I read was very good for investigators who really didn't have much experience. They did I thought a credible job initially. So to cut to the chase, how did I get involved in this thing? Sam was initially convicted. He spent 10 years in prison. Tried a number of appeals. It didn't work. He got a brand new attorney. He dumped his old attorney. He's got a brand new guy just fresh out of law school, a kid named F. Lee Bailey. And Bailey took a different approach. He didn't try to argue the evidence. Couldn't argue that. He said he didn't get a fair trial because of undue publicity. And that worked. So they gave him a second trial, and then he was acquitted in that trial. So fast forward now. His son sued the state of Ohio for wrongful conviction, malicious prosecution, negligent police work, and so forth. So I got a call from the prosecutor's office in Cleveland about this civil case, and I give them all the credit in the world. They said, "We want to know what happened here. We want you to come over and take a look and tell us what you think. If the cops screwed it up, the prosecution was bad, we'll own it. We'll try to make it right. But if they were right, if the investigation was good, the prosecution was fair, we need to defend their investigation and the integrity of the case. We just want to get to the bottom of this thing. I said, I'm in.
Gregg, what year is this? I think you're retired at this point, right?
Yes, yeah. This is 97 now. I've been retired a couple of years. Um, so it's an interesting case because it was a cold case homicide. We did exhumations of bodies. We did DNA evidence. We did all of this sort of thing, as well as a deep dive into the original investigation to try to figure out exactly what occurred. So having gone through all of this, and again, we could spend a lot of time talking about the case, but my opinion at the end of the day was they got it right the first time, that this was a staged domestic homicide, that Sam had murdered his wife and tried to make it look like a stranger had come in. Now, the plaintiff that was suing, they thought they had the murder solved with a handyman that had worked for them. And they thought they had his DNA at the scene, and which would be very compelling evidence, if they did. But their DNA evidence, their DNA analysis was flawed. And we weren't sure how they were going to handle that. They kept touting this DNA evidence. But basically what happened with their DNA, and again, it's an idea how you get swept up in their DNA expert is an expert, but he just got caught up in this frenzy that Sam didn't do it and they had the guy who did. And he overlooked basic serology. And DNA is a process of elimination, right? So the blood in question was a type O. And the handyman's blood type was type A. It couldn't be the same blood, period. End of story. Forget the DNA stuff. And they got into the DNA and a couple of alleles are close and, all this nonsense. We didn't know how they were going to handle it. And they got on the stand. He got on the stand and went through this about the alleles and all this, and then, but didn't deal with the fundamental issue. And Steve Dever, the prosecutor, got up and drove his tank through that open door, and turned this guy from a plaintiff expert to a defense expert in about 90 seconds. He said, yeah. Well, the blood on the door is type O. Yes, it is. And the handyman, his name was Richard Everling. Everling's blood is type A, is it not? And you could see the deer in the headlights look. He goes, I don't know. You mean to tell me after this 250 hours you spent in the case, you never bothered to type Everling's DNA, blood? Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. Well, if I told you that was type A, what does that say about being the source of that type O blood? Well, it couldn't be. Boom, there. That went out. But the reason I thought it was a staged domestic, there are a number of reasons. One, victimology, right? Let's look at Maryland. What was going on? Sam was having affairs with all these different women. We had letters from back in the day, and that's the hard part about doing victimology on a case 50 years old. How do you get good evidence? We had these letters that were a gold mine, where she was writing these letters to Sam's brother and said, I'm going to divorce him and I'm going to ruin him. And he's sleeping, he's having these affairs and sleeping with these women and throwing it in my face. And her brother ironically wrote, no, you got to keep this marriage together, even if it kills you. But it won't. So, but he tried to stage it, look like people don't know how to stage a crime scene. They get it from books and movies, and they don't really know. And he tried 3 different things, I think, to make it look like a sex crime. He'd had her pajamas pulled up and her legs spread, but she was not sexually assaulted. Tried to make it look like a burglary, pulled drawers out and stuff, but nothing was missing. And then tried to look like a drug crime. His little black go bag, his doctor's bag, was tipped over, and he said ampules of morphine are missing, but nothing else. And none of that made any sense. It wasn't a sexual assault. There's no burglary. And why would how many heroin addicts are there in Bay Village, Ohio, in 1954? None. And why not take the whole bag? How would a guy be able to discern between ampules of morphine and anything else? And then you layer in the victimology, And as we see in these cases, she is brutally bludgeoned. Sam said he interrupted this guy and had 2 life or death struggles with him. The only thing Sam got out of it was a black eye. So again, very inconsistent. Who was the target? His wife was definitely the target of this thing, and especially if it was the handyman. Why would the handyman leave him alive? He could identify him. Why not kill Sam if he's in the middle of this violent rage? And Sam had just banged himself in the face and gave himself a black eye. So it all came together to me to be a staged domestic homicide. And actually, that's what the jury found. And the jury was so convinced that 2 of the jurors said, if this was a criminal trial and Sam was here, we'd give him the death penalty.
Wow.
That's how strong they were in their opinion about having heard the evidence. So
this case was the basis for a movie.
And a TV show.
A TV show before that, yeah, The Fugitive was an old TV show, and then became the basis for it was called The Fugitive, as was the name of the movie that Harrison Ford starred in later. And the whole premise was the guy was wrongly convicted for killing his wife, and he was out trying to find the true killer. But in true life, he did kill his wife, and that's the reality. Not as sexy as the movie is, but that's the real story.
I guess the maintenance guy was the equivalent of the one arm, excuse me, of the one-armed man.
Yes, he was the one-armed man. The other thing that ruled him out was being a good suspect in the sexual homicide, which was their theory, that he came in to try and rape her. So is that Everling, the handyman, was a lifelong homosexual. And so that kind of didn't work. And he had a lot of group sex in prison and all of that. And he'd been known to engage in homosexual activity as a youth as well. So he's a lifelong homosexual, not the kind of guy who has a lust for Marilyn.
It was before well, I guess I was alive, and Ray barely, but this was like, if not the case of the century, certainly the case of the decade back in the 1950s, which of course the TV show The Fugitive started in the early 60s, and
Yes.
he escaped from prison, one-armed man, all that stuff. But that was a big case. Then when Sam got out, he became a professional wrestler.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's a tragic story altogether. He came out, he got his medical license back, and then killed a woman in surgery. He nicked an artery, didn't tell, put her in recovery. She bled to death. So then he got his medical license pulled. Then he became a professional wrestler, killer shepherd. And but he became alcoholic, drug addict, and eventually died in his early 40s due to the addiction. He went through 2 more marriages. The last one, the woman left him, said, "I'm afraid he's going to kill me. He's very violent." So patterns. Domestic violence was an enduring pattern for Sam as well.
I was at CrimeCon a few years ago in Nashville, and F. Lee Bailey is one of the guest speakers. And I actually had a few moments in the back room before he went on to talk to him. And a nice guy. And I mean, he had his own problems with, I think, alcoholism and bankruptcy a few times. But he was on the OJ, the dream team, the defense lawyers for OJ Simpson. But he certainly made his name on the Sam Shepard case, and the rest is history. And here you played a role well after the fact, but an important role nonetheless. So interesting again, Gregg.
And F. Lee Bailey testified in the civil trial as well in Cleveland. Interesting you talk about the alcoholism, because there was trial strategy. Steve Dever, the prosecutor, said, "I wanted to have his 3 martini lunch before he gets on the stand." And so that's how that played out. But
well-known strategy taught in law school.
Yeah.
Get your witnesses drunk, the ones you don't want to come across well.
So,
Ray?
Tell us a little bit about your book, The Unknown Darkness.
I tried to put in some of the more memorable cases, and we've touched on some of those here in our little time together. actually, I had more cases I wanted to put in, but all of a sudden, initially I got a contract to do the book, and Jim, you know how that is. You've written books. I got a contract to write 100,000 word book, and I go, I don't know 100,000 words. How am I going to write this book? But it turned out it was just the opposite. I wasn't trying to fill the book. It was trying to edit it down so that you kept the essence of what you were trying to communicate in these chapters in these cases without, with minimum content to keep it focused on the critical parts that you of the case that you were trying to get across, in the book. So yeah, that became the challenge for me. It wasn't filling the book; it was editing it down so that it still made sense at the end of the day. And I try to get a cross section of these different cases. Some of the active cases with the Bureau, and then I put in the Sam Shepard case as an example of a civil case where this analysis is brought into play. But then talking about these other cases, how different aspects of profiling was used in these different cases, whether it's the Shepard case or whether it was Shawcross or Unterweger or whatever. They're all different ways that this process is used to help get the right answer in these cases.
Yeah, and profiling is so much more than just a white male driving a beat up Chevy Impala or something like that. And really, it sounds like and a lot of people don't know this, but the goal of a profiler is not to have your analysis on an arrest warrant. That would probably never happen, or
right. The
rarest of the rare. But our goal is to take all the behavioral clues we can, and of course, match them with the forensic evidence, and pour everything into a funnel and come out with your suspect, a composite of who your suspect is. And not every single, factor or category will match up exactly, but it'll be enough identifiers there that when the police come up with 3 to 5, maybe 300 to 500 suspects, hey, here's this profiler guy, Gregg McCrary, Jim Fitzgerald, Ray Carr. This is what they put together. Let's focus on these couple guys first, because that's who the profiler said. And hopefully, if they're experienced, and Gregg, like what you shared with us, that sounds like what happened in a few of the cases that you've discussed tonight.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, it's about developing or prioritizing suspects. I mean, if you don't have any, maybe we can develop some. If you've got a bunch, well, let's prioritize who most likely fits the profile. Let's start with number one. If we can rule him out, let's go down to number two. But it's a way of focusing the investigation to hopefully cut short their violent criminal careers.
And what a lot of people also don't know is there's very little that profilers can testify to in court. I think a good profiler can be excellent for an investigation, but it really only comes down to, and I think you mentioned it in the Unterweger case, basically you did a linkage analysis with the knots. And that's what the one time I've testified to a profiling in a profiling case, it had to do with signature behavior on the person's part, and that's how you link them together. It was a serial rapist. DNA didn't match up all the time, but we can't sit in front of a jury. Well, we know it's a white male that drives this car and he's 5'8" or something like that. We can't do that. And I don't think we would argue that we shouldn't be able to do that.
That's correct.
But we can certainly point investigations in the right way, and as you say, narrow the suspect pool sometime down to just a few different individuals when they may have hundreds or thousands of suspects to begin with. And that's, if profiling is done right. Not everyone does it right. A lot of people call themselves profilers, and we've come across them over the years, and they're not. But if it's done right, they're trained well with the experience. They can really assist in an investigation and help resolve it to the very end.
Yeah, that's correct. And then, go back. We talked about the Shawcross case earlier. I wasn't going to testify that the guy dumps bodies in the river or any of that stuff. Right. But that's how we caught him, right? That's the whole idea, that you can help move the investigation along. Then in that case, the officers were able to get basically confession, and then a lot of forensic evidence out of the car, and there was plenty of evidence, and I didn't testify at all. But yeah, profiling testimony per se is not allowed. I agree. I don't think it should be, but it's used investigatively, and it can be very helpful.
It usually is not about how you caught him. It's about what you caught him with.
Yeah.
So it's the profiling aspect is the way is kind of with the chips on the ground and having you pick up the crumbs till you get to the guy. But it's not important where the crumbs are. It's important once you get there and the forensic evidence
exactly
tightens it together.
Greg, you've given us some valuable time. We have a couple TV shows coming up. Maybe we get the actual names and the dates. We can put them out on our website
Sure.
down the line.
Yep.
Again, your book is The Unknown Darkness, Profiling the Predators Among Us. Sounds like there's a book 2 in there, if not 3 or 4, if you wanted to sit down and do it.
Right, you're right.
But coming on podcasts like ours, we definitely appreciate that. Ray, I'll take us out, but any closing words before we go?
No, it's just what a storied career, Greg.
No, thank you. No,
I'm glad.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to do this kind of work. Privilege to work with guys like you as well. So,
yeah, and thank you for blazing the road ahead of Jim and I, and allowing us to follow in your footsteps. I mean,
no,
wow, so we never filled your shoes.
No, yeah.
But
that's because they're clown shoes. They're very big. You can't.
No. That's not true. They're nice wingtips. I remember them well.
Yeah.
Or penny loafers when you're off duty, right?
There you go.
Well, thanks again, Greg, for coming on Cold Red. Everyone out there, go on our various Cold Red social media sites, subscribe, like, all those things. We're also at coldredpodcast.com. Check us out there for past episodes, future episodes, and all those types of fun things. So again, as always, thanks to my co-host partner, Ray Carr. And again, our special guest tonight, Gregg McCrary. Thanks for coming on board again. And everyone, we will see you next time on Cold Red.